Welcome, grade 9 learners and educators. My name is Linda Hackner and I represent the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Centre. And we are bringing to you a series of units that cover your grade 9 CAP syllabus dealing with the failure of the Weimar, the rise of Nazi Germany, outbreak of World War II, people's experiences during World War II and the Holocaust, and of course, rescue and resistance. So our first unit today deals with why the Weimar Republic failed as a democracy. And we're going to look, of course, at the end of World War I, because everything flows through there. And grade 9, I know that in grade 8 you did this. And so you'll know that Germany was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which had quite onerous, quite difficult terms, some of which were, and I'm sure you know these, that they had to accept full responsibility for the war, that they had to give up land, they had to pay reparations, and they had to substantially reduce their army and navy. Paying reparations means paying back costs of the war to other countries. Well, how do you think Germany felt about this treaty? How do you think people saw this? And this is a cartoon that comes from a German newspaper called the Kladderadatsch, and it's entitled, it was printed in 1919, and it's entitled Clemenceau the Vampire. So Clemenceau was the Prime Minister of France, and I want you to have a look at what he's doing. I want you to think about who the woman on the bed might be. I want you to look at how she is depicted, as opposed to how Clemenceau is depicted. So you might say that she looks young. She looks like she's not in control of herself, but she's young and she's sort of fairly fresh. And then I want you to think about, well, I think I've already given you a clue about the old man who's sucking her blood. I want you to think about who the bats at the window might be. What do you think they represent? And what do you think they are waiting for? So these are questions. You can learn a lot, grade 9, from cartoons. And I want you to think about what the cartoonist might have been thinking about the Treaty of Versailles and the people he was representing in his newspaper. So the Treaty of Versailles commanded that there be political changes in Germany. So Germany had been a constitutional monarchy. In other words, it was ruled by a king who was not voted into power, but came through the royal line. But the king's powers were limited by a constitution, not unlike the British royal family. The Treaty of Versailles said that Germany had to be a democracy. So it meant that the government would be elected by the people, and they would elect the president, and then the president would choose a chancellor. That's similar to a prime minister. So that's a democratic system, okay? Because this system was seen as part of the treaty, it was never popular. So it's not that people even looked at the system and considered it under its own terms. They were just angry that it was forced on them. And this system, this government, was known as the Weimar Republic of Germany. So it had a constitution, and the constitution had very good articles or laws. For example, members of parliament are to be elected in a general, equal, immediate, and secret election. I want you to think about why votes should be secret. Why should voters not share who they're voting for with other people? Also that the voters are men and women older than 20 years, similar to us, except we vote at the age of 18. But what's really interesting, grade 9, is that women were allowed to vote. And this was really unheard of 101 years ago. Also, everyone was equal before the law, whether you were a male or a female. You had the same rights, but you also had the same responsibilities and obligations to behave yourself within the law. Individuals' rights were inviolable. They could not be violated. They could not be damaged. Youth was to be protected in all spheres of their lives. And religion could be practiced freely and under the protection of the state. So this was a really advanced constitution and a very, very sort of reasonable constitution, not unlike our own. If you look at some of these articles and you look at articles in our constitution, they are very similar. But Germany was in a state of political upheaval, so people couldn't come to an agreement about things. You had a lot of parties that were pro the democracy, they wanted the democracy, and there were a whole bunch of parties that were pro-democracy. But then you had a whole bunch of parties that were anti the democracy. They wanted a single leader, one autocratic leader who would tell them what to do. And then you had a whole lot of anti-democracy parties, but they wanted a communist system. So really, Germany was not in a good state politically, and it was not in a good state economically. Germany was suffering not only from inflation, and let me just briefly explain. Inflation is when your money loses its value. And you can talk to anyone in your household, and they will tell you that from year to year, prices go up, but the money stays the same. Salaries don't go up at the same rate that prices do. And so this is called inflation. So where last year you could buy a bottle of milk for 10 Rand, this year it'll cost you 11 Rand 50 for the same bottle of milk, but you haven't received a bigger salary. So that's inflation. But in Germany, there was something called hyperinflation. And this meant that money lost its value to such an extent that it was used for children to play with. They're playing with piles of banknotes, or people used it to warm their houses. And let me explain how this came to be. Loaf of bread in Germany, November 1918, it costs 1 mark. Now, for your own ease of understanding, imagine that a mark is a rand, okay? So 1918, it costs 1 mark. 1922, the same loaf of bread costs 163 marks. 1923, that loaf of bread costs 1,500,000 marks, and in November 1923, it costs billion marks, or 200 billion. I'm not even quite sure what that is. But you can see how it becomes absurd. Nobody can afford anything, and the mark has just become valueless. So Gustav Stresemann, the German foreign minister, approaches Charles Dawes, who's the vice president of the USA, and he asks for loans. And between the two of them, they come up with the Dawes plan. As well as that, Gustav Stresemann creates a new German currency called the Rentenmark. And all of this leads to a complete, well, not a complete, but certainly an economic recovery. Things are going well. People have got food on their table. They're able to put a roof over their heads. So when you look at the percentage of seats in Parliament in 1928, you will notice that the Democratic Party has the most. The Communist Party is over here, with some of it, the Centre Party, which is also pro-democracy. So you can see that parties like the Nazi Party, like this black triangle here, and the Landvolk Party, they wanted autocracies. They have very, very small percentages of the vote because people don't want them, because people think that their platforms, their ideologies, their worldviews are a little bit extreme. But then what happens in 1928? You all know the answer to that. 1929. You have the stock market crash in America. And with that crash, no more loans to Germany. And of course, this plunges Germany into a worse economic situation than it was. And so you can see just 2 years later, the Nazi Party is now on 18.3%. And other parties are getting smaller, other parties are getting bigger, but people are starting to listen to those sort of fringe parties because they make promises. And people need promises when they're in a bad space, when they feel that things just are not getting better for them. When someone comes along and says, I will make it better. Vote for me. you will get free housing, you will get a job, you will get free electricity. I will make sure that you get everything you need. People who are desperate will vote for someone who makes those promises. So let's look at how Hitler actually comes to power, because the Nazi Party never gets a majority, never gets a majority. How do they get into power? 1932, there's another election, and the Nazis get 37.27%. Quite a bit more than the 2.4% that they got in 1928. But then in November 1930, they lose a bit of the vote. The Nazis are not gaining a majority via the democracy. So what they do is they form a coalition. They join with other conservative parties. And now they're becoming a force. So Paul von Hindenburg, who's the president of Germany, in 1933, in January, appoints Hitler the Chancellor of Germany, like the Prime Minister of Germany, because von Hindenburg believes that rather put Hitler inside the government, working on their side, so to speak, than outside the government, and they feel they can control what he does. Unfortunately, they are wrong. On March the 23rd, 1933, Hitler passes a law called the Law to Remedy the Distress of the People and the Reich. And this is known as the Enabling Act. And what does it enable? It enables the Prime Minister, i.e. Adolf Hitler, to not go through Parliament to make any decisions, to not ask anybody for a vote, but to declare himself a dictator. And of course, this officially ends the democracy, because if Hitler can enact laws without permission from Parliament or his president, then he becomes the dictator. And so the Nazi Party becomes the ruling party in Germany, with Hitler as its leader. Thank you so much for watching, grade 9s and grade 9 educators, and I will see you again in unit. Thank you. Bye-bye.